Morning. Thank you, Mitchell. So, again, it is very unfortunate that Fabian is not able to be here today. He has come down with COVID, and it's his wife. He was concerned about that, and then he made the right decision to stay back in Switzerland. Fabian has been kind enough to leave through a few things, his entire presentation, which has been amazing to read through, and as well a note to all of us. So, this is from Fabian. Dear participants of BGIN Block 9, unfortunately, I have caught the spicy cough, those are there, spicy cough, and cannot join you in Sydney today. This is very frustrating to say the least, as I was eagerly anticipating the conference. It would have been my first visit to Australia, even that's so sad, such a great country. And I was excited to engage in discussions with all of you. Given that my voice is still very weak and I'm constantly coughing, delivering remote participation at presentation was not a good option either. I'm very grateful for the organizers having found another solution, and I extend my sincere thanks to Gemma Zhu for stepping in. Now, before Gemma begins, please allow me to share some thoughts. Public blockchains are a significant innovation in governance. I firmly believe that a future without public blockchains poses a substantial risk. Imagine a scenario where currencies, digital assets, and protocols are consolidated onto a single centralized database. The economic and political ramifications of centralized app stores, social media platforms are already challenging, but the consequences could be far more severe if a centralized platform becomes the backbone of our entire digital economy. This potential future underscores the necessity of a neutral infrastructure, such as public blockchains. However, absent privacy-enhancing protocols, public blockchains could rapidly devolve into a dystopian nightmare. Ensuring individuals' rights to privacy is paramount, and it's crucial to acknowledge that financial market regulations do not require users to advertise their entire transaction history to the general public. The core concept of privacy pools is to enable individuals to maintain privacy by disassociating from activities considered unlawful or immoral in the communities and jurisdictions. I want to be very clear in the following points, since there have already been some misunderstandings in the past, leading to numerous unpleasant tweets and messages. Privacy pools is a proposal for a neutral protocol. It does not grant special privileges to anyone. There are no admin keys or restricted functions, nor is it a permission blockchain. It is a simple extension for Tornado Cash-like protocols, allowing people to create their own association sets and generate the corresponding proofs. The proposal, co-authored by Vitalik, Amin Soleimani, Matthias Nadler, Jacob Illam, and myself, has sparked significant discussion. We are pleased with his engagement and confident in the proposal's beneficial attributes. However, it's essential to view this as an initial step. Several questions remain unanswered. How will association sets providers be structured to ensure competition and diversity? What are the implications of androgynous pool transfers? How do association sets impact the effective anonymous set? Our paper includes an entire section dedicated to limitations and further research. Just like the future of all of us trying to create, research should also be decentralized. I encourage your involvement in shaping a future where robust, privacy-enhancing protocols thrive in a regulated environment. If you want to talk, feel free to connect with me on email, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Enjoy the remainder of the conference. Best wishes from Switzerland. And once again, thank you very much to the organizers, Fabian. So, yeah, a little talk about that. Without further ado, I will actually move on to the next piece, where we will hear from a keynote that Gemma has kindly stood up and said yes to. Gemma is the core contributor of Portalgate, which is a privacy pool, correct? Dark pool. Is it worse or better? Tell me. Different. There we go. On par. Here we go. So we'll hear from Gemma right now, and then we'll fall into the fireside between Gemma and Zuka Wilcox. All right. So Gemma.
Excellent. Yeah, that's not the presentation. I guess before I officially start the presentation, just a quick show of hands. Who's actually gone through the privacy paper? Okay, and how many of you here sort of come from a technical background, say understand ZK, Okay, and the rest are all policy / regulatory. Okay, so my presentation will. Okay, it's not coming up. So my presentation will go through effectively the sort of the technical details of the paper, with a focus on the implementation and association sets, and then at the end I'll use my project portal gate as an example of implementing some but not all of the privacy pool suggestions. So I guess whilst we wait for the presentation to come up, some background about myself. I'm non-technical. I come from a background in TradFi. I used to work in investment banking. Came upon Ethereum by chance in 2017, and then have been down this rabbit hole ever since, right? So I'm first and foremost an investor in Web3. I have my own fund, Fork Ventures. We invest a very early stage infrastructure and DeFi projects. So examples would be Pocket Network, Maple Finance, probably earlier days like Neo, back to the Ethereum of China back in 2017. And then more recently, in fact, since Tornado Cash was sanctioned, the idea to do a more compliant version of a privacy book came up. And that's when I started Portalgate around just before Christmas last year. Right? So Portalgate has evolved to become we'll try to be a compliant dark pool, which I'll go through just in a little while. So now that I see the presentation is up, my details are there. So I think we'll get started on the next slide. So who's clicking? Yeah. So before I go into the exact, the actual privacy pool itself, let's go through some history, just a quick history of I guess mixers in general, right? So we start with coin joins. So I remember I first read about this when I first got into crypto early 2017, right? So coin joins effectively is a small group of users coming together and mixing coins in the same transaction, right? So you can see the total input and the total output, but you can't link a specific input to a specific output. And the idea is that users can go through the protocol with different sets of users, so that over time, obviously, the more different types of users you go through with, the better the mixing, right? So that was the very I guess first version of what a mixer is. And then Monero came along and then took this further with ring signature schemes, right? Where they extended that with the users allowing to mix with each other without going off chain. But the main problem with these ideas is that repeated mixing with different small groups of users will ultimately lead to data leakages, right? So then fast forward to more recent times, Zcash came along, right? So Zcash and Tornado Cash are both applications of a more generic zero knowledge proof. Now, the main thing I think with Tornado Cash is it's probably the first widely used application because it has that, in addition to the ZK proof side, it actually has the on-chain smart contract abilities, right? It's built on Ethereum. So I would say I personally have tried Tornado Cash back when it first came about, I think 2019. I thought it was a very smart way to allow, particularly with their front end, allow users who have no technical abilities and no understanding of how mixers or ZK would work to actually use it and achieve that basic premise of obfuscating links between deposits and withdrawals, right? So that's sort of the background. But August last year, Tornado Cash was sanctioned, right? I think, I still think that it's a great product, that the issue is with the users, right? The issue is not with the product, but the users. So before diving into any more about the privacy pools, we'll just go through the technical details about like what are ZK snarks, right? So the ZK snarks, I think it stands for a zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. Basically, it's a technology that allows users to prove mathematical claims about a combination of public and private data that satisfies two key properties. Right. The first one is zero knowledge, meaning that the prover that nothing about the private data is revealed aside from the fact that the private data can satisfy the claim that has been proven, right? So nothing is revealed except that it satisfies the claim to be proven. The second one, which is less important in this instance, is succinctness, is that the proof is short, right? It's easy to verify, even though it may take a long time and heavily computational to generate. So the second property, succinctness, is more important for, say, ZK rollups, right? ZK sync, ZK EVM, that's more important. The first one, zero knowledge, is essential for what we're doing in privacy. And the other key aspect is ZK circuits, right? So what are ZK circuits, right? Circuits are basically instructions that dictate how a prover should generate a proof and then how a verifier should verify the claims. Mathematically, it's basically a function of f of x and w, where x is a private input, w is a public input, and that leads to a true or false, right? So basically, the ZK snark proves that for an x known by both the prover and the verifier, the prover knows w such that f of w x and w returns true. So that's the very basics of what a ZK snark is, right? So the next step is then let's go through how that's implemented in the in sort of a Zcash, Tornado Cash like system. So assume a coin has a secret, right? That's known by its owner. Yep. Next slide. Yeah, by its owner S, right? So there are two, I guess, properties: the public ID, a coin ID, let's call that, and a nullifier U. The hash, we sort of see hash, like SHA-256. It's just a cryptographic function that, given S, you can then compute your coin ID, which is public, and your nullifier. But the random behavior of the hash function means that your nullifier and your coin ID can never be linked up, right? Unless you know the secret S. Right, so the blockchain keeps tracks of all the public IDs that's been created and all the nullifiers that's been spent, right? And these sets are ever growing. So as you get more deposits, the set you add to the end of that, what is now called the Merkle tree, right? So the Merkle tree is a set of data that stores is a data structure that stores all of the coin IDs, and you get and as the deposit grows, the tree then grows into more branches. Now, given a set of value, a specific value in the tree, right, and a root hash, you can actually work out a Merkle branch. Now, the Merkle branch is useful because it is actually a small piece of data that it can prove, used to be proved to prove any particular coin ID is actually in the tree, right? And that's quite important because that sort of shows the coin has been, in fact, that deposit is in fact in there and hasn't been made up, etc. So so next slide, Joey. When a coin is then sent to someone else, right, you provide the nullifier, you have a new coin ID, and then also a ZK snark. So the snark have the following private inputs. It has a user secret S. It has a Merkle branch in the tree that actually proves that the coin was created at some point in the past. It also has two public inputs, the nullifier, right, and the root hash, which is what the proof is checking against, right? So the snark then proves the two properties, the nullifier and that branch is valid. Now, outside of the ZK snark, the protocol also checks that the root hash is a current or historical root hash in the tree to know that the withdrawal note the withdrawer has the right note, as otherwise would provide a different root hash. And then the nullifier is not already already on chain, because if it is already on chain, it means that it's already been spent. So the nullifier actually prevents double spending. Now, so that sort of quickly goes through the technical basics of how ZK snarks would work. And then the next part, we'll go through the actual privacy pools and the core premise of the association sets. So Joey, next slide. Great. So association sets. So the core concept of privacy pools. So stepping back, right? In Tornado Cash, the key reason it was sanctioned was because the North Koreans, Lazarus, were putting through, I think, $600 million or more into, mixing through the different pools, right? But as other users, you are by default associated with all of the deposits in these pools, right? You could not say that I want to disassociate myself with these particular deposits, which I think are high risk. And therefore, I could still use the privacy pool, use Tornado Cash, and be clean. So the core premise of privacy pools is that instead of proving, ZK proving that the withdrawal was made, is linked to some previously made deposits, the users can actually prove that the deposits is a member, or the withdrawal was from funds that is membership of a more restrictive association set. Right, the association set could be the complete deposits, which is by default what Tornado Cash was, or it could be a set consisting only of the user's own deposit, right, which is the other extreme, right? So we call this association set of one, which has very specific use cases I'll go into in a bit more detail, or anything in between. Now, the way to a bit of technical details, the way to prove that is we don't actually require users to prove that the association set itself is a subset of all of the deposits. We simply require the user to do two proofs. One is that proving that their coin ID, so their public ID, is somewhere in the coin ID tree with the root hash R, which represents the root of all of the deposits. And the other one proving that the same coin ID is somewhere in the tree representing the subset, right? RA, right, represented by the root hash RA. So the intention is that the full association set is somewhere available somewhere, on-chain or off-chain, right? And the core concept is, instead of requiring the user to specify exactly which deposit their withdrawal came from, or on the other extreme, have no idea where the deposit, where the withdrawal came from, right? We let them to provide a set of possible origins of their funds, and this can be as wide or as narrow as they wish. Sure. Yeah, no, I think the middle is fine. But let's.
Testing. We go.
So my question is, first, I understand that why you have to prove the membership in your left tree. Why on the right tree? What are we trying to prove there?
So in the right tree is proving that the coin ID, the same coin ID, is in it's in a tree, in a different tree that has a root A, right? But to show that the root hash, even though they're two different root hash, but because it's the same coin ID, that's proving both the root and the root RA, right? It's proving that the left tree is effectively a association set.
So left tree, I understand that you.
Sorry, the right tree. Sorry,
yeah,
the right tree.
Yeah, the left tree is as if you have a set of UTX. So I'm just saying, and you want to prove that that you're making from something which is a valid coin or UTX. Yep. So that I understand. So you are proving membership in that big set. Is the right subtree some kind of
it's a dynamic, it's a subset because it's a dynamic association set, right? So that association set could have any like a fragment or a portion of the deposits of the first set, right? But rather than approving directly the RA.
But isn't it enough to prove the left? Sorry, I'm being a bit technical here. I'm a technical person. But yeah, it's okay if we.
No, I think anyone else. So as a non-technical person, that's about as much as I know about this RA and R. But anyone else who's more technical, feel free to answer.
Okay, I mean, we can take it up later. So I felt that, only one membership in one tree, that is a big set, would be enough, but it could be for some reason you are taking a smaller subset, which would be more efficient, I would believe, but not being able to understand what is the relation between the left and the right subtree at this point. But please go ahead and we can take questions.
No worries. So anyone who's more technical, feel free to jump in. Okay, so Joe. Where's the mic?
This is great. So RA is constructed separately. So RA is like a subset of all the available nodes that are included in the overarching Merkle tree R. So R isn't featured in the smart contract because it's tracking all the unspent and the spent nodes. But then RA is sort of like that can be stored off chain, computed elsewhere. Yeah. And then that represents what's sort of, someone might deem as like deposits that are safe. And that can be anywhere between the size of 1, featuring just the user's own deposit note, to size N, or which the entirety of the where you're not forbidding any one deposit.
Great. Just a shout out to Joe, who's actually one of our developers at Portalgate. Right. I'm glad he's the developer and I'm not the developer. No, great question. Any other questions? No? Cool. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, so this is becoming a bit more sort of practical and regulatory focused, right? So let's illustrate how this would work in a practical sense. So let's assume there are 5 players, right? Alice, Bob, Carl, David, and Eve. Now, the first 4, Alice, Bob, Carl, and David, are good actors, and then but who still want to preserve their privacy, right? Who still don't want people to know what they're doing on chain, or the public to know what they're doing on chain. But Eve is a bad actor. She's a hacker, or someone who's a thief. But also assume that Eve's wallet has been labeled Eve and is publicly known to be, I guess, a tainted wallet, right? So assuming any funds coming in and out of Eve's wallet are dirty coins, tainted coins, good actors don't want to touch. Now, so they're all going to this same privacy pool, right? Now, with this setup, each of them can now pick which association set they want their withdrawal to come from. Now, an association set has to include the depositor's own deposit first, but then they can freely choose the other depositors that they want to include in the set. So for the good actors, Alice, Bob, Carl, and David, their incentive, they have 2 incentives. One is they want to maximize their privacy, which means they want to have the association set to be as wide, as broad as possible. But secondly, on the other hand, is they don't want the association set, or they don't want to be associated with any potential high-risk tainted deposits, right? So as a result, what they would end up doing is the 4 of the good actors would have an association set that includes the other 3 good actors, but not Eve, right? So as a result, you would see that the 4 of them would have the same association set. Now, on the other hand, Eve also wants to maximize her association set for privacy, but because she has to be associated with her own deposit to start with, therefore, in order to maximize her privacy, she has to include all the other 4 deposits as well. So as a result, her association set is now 5. So even though Eve herself has made no information about whether she's good or bad, right, in the pool, but by a simple process of elimination, then we know that withdrawal of 5 is the one that has to come from a bad actor, right? Because it's not included in the association set. So that's a very basic, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for explaining this. So, yeah, just a quick question on how would Alice, Bob, Carl, or David know that, yeah, who is the bad actor, who is the good actor, right? I mean, as Bob, I would only know myself, I'm good or bad, right? But I mean, I would know whom to associate with. How?
Sure. So that's actually where I'm going to talk about next is how do you generate association sets or who generates them, right? But very good question. I think I should get to that, in fact, in the very next slide. So next slide, please. Yep. So let's talk about, I guess before talking about generating of the association sets, there are, I guess, two strategies, right? One could employ to generate, the association sets. One is exclusion and inclusion, and one is exclusion. So inclusion basically identifies a set of deposits where we have evidence that they are low risk, right? And then construct a set that only contains those deposits. So we only include these ones. The exclusion strategies is the opposite, right? We have evidence that these are high risk, and therefore we construct association set containing everything else but these deposits. So in practice, right, as you made a good point, as a user, you're just a everyday user. You may even be a fund, right, a trading fund, but you don't have skills in picking deposits or have no tools to do that. So in practice, rather than letting users picking it themselves, we can have these intermediaries, right? We call those ASPs, association set providers, who can generate association sets based on certain properties, right? So there could be, in parallel, many different types of association sets that exist to satisfy the requirement of different types of users. Now, it can be these association set providers can be entirely constructed on chain with no human intervention. But the key thing is that there should be the ability to download these association sets locally so that users can generate proof memberships locally, right, without revealing any extra information even to the provider. Now, the few ways for let's say someone's an association set provider. So this could be, maybe if I had a privacy pool, maybe I can say node runners are association set providers, right? And in return, they get a fee for doing that, right? So this then, we can go and create a token economy around this sort of model. So there could be certain ways. So one way is to generate to be included in a low risk association set. There's a delay, right? It could be a 7-day delay. So that any deposit that's been made 7 days ago, more than 7 days ago, and that hasn't been flagged by, say, OFAC or any, say, chain analysis or any on-chain tracking tools, then that can be added to the set, right, automatically. But obviously, if it has been flagged, then it wouldn't be added. It could be that, to join an association set, the deposit N dollars per person per month, right? So the deposit value by a wallet address has to be below a certain threshold, right? Because the assumption there is that if you're a bad actor, you've hacked someone's wallet, you've stolen some funds, you want to get them through the privacy pool quickly, which means that you're probably going to put through a lot of funds through wallet addresses within a month, right? So if we have a threshold below which below that monthly spend, those deposits are automatically added to the set, as well as maybe proving that the depositor has some sort of proof, what they call a proof of human, right? So it might be a national ID or a social media account or some sort of non-on-chain verification. Another one is a more restrictive set, is that it's not just N dollars per month, but per month of a trusted community. Now, the question then is, how to define what is a high trust community, right? It may be that it could be, and I'll go through this as an example down the track, that we're all users of an alliance of banks or of one particular bank, right? That because you all go through KYC through that bank, then any deposits from customers in that bank can go into a particular set, right? And the last one is combining with AI, a real-time based score where the association set provider, right, use AI to provide a risk score for each deposit, right? And based on that a risk score, the deposits are then categorized into, say, high, medium, low risk sets, right? So I guess it's a threshold-based association set. I mean, these are just some of the initial ideas that was proposed in the paper. So I think one of the things I'll be keen to hear anyone's thoughts is any other ways to construct these association sets. Yep.
Hi. Oh God, maybe I've got COVID. Jokes. Steve from Lockstep Consulting. I'm just trying to work out how to think about this. So this is all new to me. But the idea of an association set provider, or the idea of AI-based risk scoring, it starts to feel a bit TradFi to me. It starts to feel like there's a central admin constructing the set. So I don't know how to think about that. The other thing that really sort of disturbs me is that the whole idea of risk scoring runs counter to zero trust, in my view, because zero trust would assume you know nothing about anything and everything should be treated the same, whether it's high risk or low risk. So why are we worried about low risk, high risk in DeFi? It just, like, I'm having a cognitive dissonance here. It feels very TradFi to be thinking about risk at all. So how do you think about that?
Sure. So that first part of the question about having these set providers, starting to have decentralized entities, and I think that's where if I was to build a privacy pool, right, based on this model, and I would initially probably have one association set provider, which would probably be the developer team itself, because that would be to start with, right? And then over time, the way we decentralize that is you want to have anyone, say, or people who meet certain criteria can be an association set provider. You decentralize that out from a very practical perspective. Just like for dark pools or some sort of ZK ID, we have a single provider first, and then you decentralize out to multiple providers from a practical implementation perspective. But I agree that these association set providers at the moment is poorly defined. And, I would imagine that, yes, so you wouldn't have, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have one provider. You may have multiple providers who have an economic benefit or have an economic incentive to do a good job, right? So they could have some sort of staking, or they could have a bonding that if they do a bad job, or if their sets are not, what they turn out to be, they could have some sort of economic punishment or penalty. On your second point about, why we're talking about risk, right? So, I mean, Tornado Cash had none of this, right? Because the association set for Tornado Cash was the entire set of deposits in each pool, right? But then that comes back to the regulatory problem of good actors, bad actors mixed together, and as a result, no one can use the pools at all because of the few bad actors that have tainted everyone else, right? So I think this comes down to, yes, in an ideal world, we have none of this, right? We can just all permissionlessly use any DeFi pool, not subject to any regulatory oversight. But I think this is coming about because ultimately we still live in a real world regulated with laws and regulations, and so in order to satisfy the real world requirement, some sort of compromise or some sort of compromise, I think, is needed. Sure, at the moment, it's still the traditional KYB KYC, but at least I think what this paper proposes is actually quite an innovative and also somewhat mathematically based way to filter out the bad actors so that the good actors can continue enjoying what is still a relatively decentralized way for obfuscation, right? So, Joey?
Thank you.
This is super fascinating. Thank you. I'm interested to understand about how the attributes can be taken potentially using off-chain sources. If we're just using very arbitrary quantitative sources that are available on chain, it could actually hide or potentially provided some level of adverse selection for those who may not have like a lot of history with the address. You know, an address was just spun up, therefore they may not be in approved association sets because, you know, the reputation that's stored on their usage or the transactions aren't there. So how would you go about in a way where we can start using, let's say, obfuscated proofs around, let's say, like university degrees or like reputation or credentials that would be valued in, you know, everyday, you know, real, you know, life?
So I think that comes down to, you know, anything. It's almost like tokenizing, you know, in a bit of a tangent, right? Tokenizing real world assets, which don't have an on-chain oracle, right? So at the moment, we tokenize T-bills, bonds, because these price quotes are already online, or you can plug them into say a chain link, and therefore get these real-time oracles. Whereas, you know, things like properties, you know, diplomas, degrees, off-chain credentials, that is always the key. There is not so much how good the technology is. The key there is how do we ensure that the oracle is accurate, right? Because the oracle, in order to get a University of Sydney, University of Melbourne diploma on chain, someone has to input that on chain, and that inputting process could be an issue. Now, I haven't seen a good way to resolve that. To be honest, I think, and that's also why, you know, if you look at real world assets, T-bills so far is the most popular, right? There hasn't been any other really real world assets that doesn't have an on-chain oracle taking off.
Yeah, I definitely I 100% agree. Like when it comes to any tokenization of real world assets, you have like an authoritative source that will arbitrate and say this is the case. Let's say University of Sydney would say, you know, I gave you a degree, a diploma, whatever else, and therefore now we can prove this address is owned by University of Sydney. Therefore, we can have some level of provenance to prove that their origin was actually authoritative and true. But then a peer value in the long term is probably where we would want to head if we want to be more decentralized. Do you think there's any possibility that these like privacy pools and dark pools, etc., will have levels of peer evaluated sourcing to allow for new associated sets as opposed to, let's say, space and time and history of an address? Yeah.
So I think that comes actually into these. You know, you raise a good point, Joey, about the peer association, right? The peer reviews. So effectively, we can have these. We can start with these, you know, say these static association sets, but over time they could be peer reviewed regularly and become dynamic, right? And effectively, like, it becomes an iterative process, that as long as each time you can prove that that root hash is a subset of the entire set, then that's fine. So I think that, you know, making it dynamic over time is a way to improve the quality of these association sets.
What would happen if a good actor goes bad, or if a wallet is taken over by a bad actor? So you are allowing someone in the pool and then find out later on that something has happened.
Yeah. So let's say, you know, that's a good example, right? So initially you come in after a 7-day delay, you come in, and then after, say, a 30-day delay, you realize that the person who let in the wallet is actually a hacker, right? And they know the trick and they're just holding it out after 7 days. So in that case, I would assume that you can association checks can change, and therefore you can add but also delete or it's generating your proof that does not include that particular bad actor from that point on. Right.
Could you filter that retroactively? Could you, you know, if the pool itself was cooperating, so, you know, you and I are in a pool, we're good actors. Net is in the pool because we think Net is a good actor. Sorry, Net. We think Net is a good actor as well, but then Net's wallet is hacked. Now we are still cooperating with AML authorities, or, you know, so the pool basically wants to cooperate. The 7 days are over. Could we help basically you know, filter out that transaction if the pool was willingly cooperating with authorities?
I would say so, because I would say you simply generate a new set that is the same as the old set, just without the one bad actor. Yeah.
I guess related, if it turns out you discover later that there was a bad actor present and transacting, have they tainted all the other good addresses in that period?
I would say in that period, yes. And that's always a risk. Right? I think it's same with KYB, KYC, right? You KYB an entity and you think that entity is good or an individual. And then later down the track, you realize, oh, this person has engaged in money laundering, right?
Yeah,
Gone through
usually to a more restricted set of people they actually transact with, not like everyone.
everyone else. Yeah. So you're saying the whole, like, saying the entire bank, all the other accounts in the same bank is tainted, right? So, so I think in that case, that's probably, I would say, probably a regulatory question. I mean, from a mathematics perspective, right? Yes, you would say that you were in the same set for the first 30 days, right before it was kicked out, the person was kicked out. Therefore, in theory, you have associated yourself with this particular bad actor. But I guess this is where the off-chain regulatory would come in and assume if you can prove that no one knew in the first 30 days that this person was bad and then was kicked out after 30 days. I think the other actors may have a, may not be implicated.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think this
somehow, I mean, that whole previous association set, in a sense, is tainted. You might want to kind of recreate a new one, but
set.
you have to kind of separately reestablish somehow that it's not tainted. So that's, you kind of back where you were at the start.
Yeah, I think that's more a regulatory regulatory question, or discussion.
The other question I had was from a regulator's perspective, like for AML CTF regulators who are doing monitoring, don't they want to kind of observe transactions to also notice patterns that are suspicious in order to help assess whether or not an actor is bad? And if so, is this kind of, that's not going to let them do that kind of monitoring, right?
No, and in fact, that's one of the next slides we're going to get onto is, how do we use on-chain transaction analysis tools, right? Is the fact that you can actually keep some of the membership sets on-chain and give them access to the membership sets as a set. Now, to the individual deposits, right? If particularly a UTXO-based model, if regulatory comes down to, a particular individual or entities that I want to know all of your history in the last 3 months, including the funds you've put through the privacy pool, as long as they keep their notes, their secret, you can actually track and hand them over to the regulators. You should be able to track the individual deposit and withdrawal transactions from a pool, but that will require the corporation of the user. So we actually have the same questions that we get asked all the time for our dark pool as well, right? So the privacy, the node itself can reveal the link as long as the user is willing to hand it over. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So I think this association set providers, they generate a range of questions, and to choose or to have a designated association set provider would be again a big question. And there's like, how do we guarantee that this provider is an honest provider? And then, do they have to comply with anything? There's a whole lot of, regulatory aspect around these providers are also, come into question. So just trying to think, like, in order to solve one problem, you're getting into another set of problems. So
yeah, so I think from a regulatory perspective, that creates effectively, how do we designate who these people are, right? It's almost like adding more grayness to an already murky pool. I don't know. So I think that really depends on what the regulators think. But secondly is, how do we I think from an incentive perspective, how do we ensure they're good actors? I think it has to be economic incentive, right? Some sort of staking is required, or some sort of, they have to put in a deposit themselves that you get slashed if they're bad actors. So I think that's probably, from a practical implementation, even without the regulatory clarity, is economic incentive first. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I so appreciate that point, because I do think that it, like, I remember reading this paper when it came out and really appreciated that it presents a piece of a solution, right? Like there's a lot of implications more broadly that you've got to then solve the identity, credential, like issuance authority and process of determining that you're not risky, which in some cases, I know in the crypto space, people feel, well, you're not on the SDN list, you're not sanctioned, so therefore you're not risky. And that's not a holistic understanding of what KYC and knowing your customer is. It's a much more expansive risk process, but that's not what this paper was trying to address. And so I really appreciated you pointing on the slide to like real-time AI-based scoring, because AI will point to lots of different types of data and patterns and things that will need to be dynamic and growing over time to assess that risk. So highlighting that there's more predicate efforts that will have to be done to be able to implement this effectively, looking at like what are the identity solutions and how are they going to assess risk and what are those economic incentives. I did think it was really intriguing. I do agree that the ASPs tend to lend themselves to be very attractive from a regulatory perspective. That doesn't have to be regulatory by government. Like the sector has called for self-regulation, like the market can regulate itself with expectations, but they would have to establish some standards. So sort of a shout back to the, or call back to the conversations that we had yesterday about like what is the way to sort of ensure a level of credibility and accountability to consumers, to the market and other service providers, and then ultimately to authorities. So I do think that's the other piece, that looking after the fact, like where does regulation, whether from the government involving supervision or the industry driving those practices and convincing authorities that they can handle this. And my only real question, which I think you were really getting at, it might be on your next slide, was speaking to like, where are all the points of discoverability? I think like calling out explicitly, you're starting to talk to it, which is that the only way to get for full discoverability of the information of the transfers is with consent and cooperation, which is not always something that will make authorities feel hunky-dory, but agreed that that might be part of the balance that authorities have to be okay with, is that like there is information that will be undiscoverable if not consented by consumers. But I am curious if you feel that there is any point of discovery that does not entail consent or may not implicate consent by the user needing to be there to be able to discover it. Anyway, that may be a good lead into the next slide that talks about cooperation with the analytics firms. But I was curious if you had any thoughts about what discoverability can look like for authorities.
Yes, I think the short answer is yes. From a build perspective, I have seen not in the privacy pool context, but in the zero knowledge identity context, that particularly around KYB KYC, effectively you prove your identity off chain, and then you have a wallet on chain that's not linked to your identity off chain, but it's proven that the wallet is compliant without linking back to the individual, right, or the entity. And the way, so how regulators get access to that, right, without the corporation of the individual to say that that's my wallet, is there are sort of ZK ways, so using these multi-sig keys effectively. So I won't go into the technical details of how that works. It's actually built by one of our compliance partners for the dark pool. Effectively, the regulators would have a key, right? And the idea is that the regulators will have to get together themselves. So let's say the FBI, DOJ, SEC, right? 2 of the 3 have to get together, come and sign with their key to open up and effectively to link up the ID with the wallet, right? So that's a way that can as you say, can reveal identities without the consent of the user, but also requires a bit of coordination effort, right, from the regulators, to make sure that it's not just some one person in the SEC on this vendetta, but it's actually a real subpoenaed, coordinated effort, right, to move. So that is one way that's possible in the ID context, which I assume, and then therefore we can implement this in a privacy pool context as well. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yes. I'll rush. So the next slide is actually, we kind of touched this previously, right? So we can store the proofs on chain to go through, so that say Chain Analysis, TRM Labs can then access them and then give them risk scoring. other ways of creating association sets, which I think I've touched on before as well, is, you know, alliance of banks can put all of their customers into one association set, right? So that they know that any withdrawal coming out of this particular association set has been a KYB KYC, is secure, and don't need for any other further proof, right? So that's one way. The other extreme is that if an individual is required to show a proof of funds from a particular source, right? That individual can request an association set of one, right? Because that effectively is revealing the direct link between the withdrawal and the deposit if your association set only includes your own deposit, right? So, but the key thing there is that whoever you provide that evidence to or that piece of information to, you have to trust that that party is not going to share that with other people or sell it for data, right? Because that's effectively saying that you haven't already gone through a privacy pool. You've provided a direct link between your withdrawal wallet and your deposit wallet. So these are sort of the various ways we can manipulate association sets. Next slide. So that's all about the privacy pool. So now I just want to quickly talk about Portalgate, so the dark pool, right? So the main, I guess, difference or the main thing that we did, the reason we want to build a dark pool. So firstly, a dark pool is a TradFi concept, right? A dark pool in TradFi is where a group of banks get together and they trade amongst themselves, typically in large amounts, without knowing what their counterparty is offering or bidding, and therefore not moving the price, but knowing that everyone in this dark pool is KYB KYC'd, or they know that, you know, the counterparty is, you know, one of 100 banks, for example, right? So it becomes like a specific association set. Now, the features of this is really that everything's hidden, right? So it's the complete opposite to what we have on chain. Everything from not just the wallets, but the order size, the order intent, is it a bid or an offer, the price, even the pair itself, is hidden until the moment that there's a match of the orders and the swap happens on chain, right? That this atomic swap. Now, a dark pool can be used as a mixer because people can go in, not trade with anyone, and withdraw into a new pool. So therefore, we do have this KYB KYC application that users have to use. And in fact, you know, the KYB KYC example I gave before is what we're using now, right? So there is that potential sort of multi-sig way if regulators needed to actually link up the ID with the wallets. And then for the final slide, actually final two slides, next slide. Yeah, so this just gives through how the dark pool works. Technically, we're using, from a tech perspective, we're using Ultra Plonk, which is an enhanced ZK snark. Here, the prover itself is the end user. So the trader generates the proof locally in the browser. And then the verifier is our smart contract, which is what we call the singularity, right? The singularity is just a set of on-chain contracts where as a user, you deposit into the pool. And then from the singularity, you can then access either the order book or the various integrated pools that we have integrated with, right? So which means if you go through into Uniswap, you can trade in Uniswap as you would normally, but on chain, what comes up is just our singularity address. So the singularity address, the contract address shows up as a single user on chain, on Etherscan, right? Whereas, you know, in fact, it could be that there could be thousands of wallets in there making these different transactions, right? So over time, you know, if we can bootstrap well, then effectively the Portalgate singularity becomes like potentially the largest single user of the various DeFi pools, right? And everyone else in there therefore have their addresses obfuscated on chain. Now, as a regulator, if a regulator wants to know, you know, to a fund and say, I want to know all your trades, as long as they keep all their private notes, the regulator can see every single transaction they have done through our through Portalgate. So that does require an opt-in by the individual. Now, our target users are in fact funds, institutions. So we don't sort of foresee any potential issues with the funds not cooperating with regulators if they're asked. Yeah, I think that I went through the use cases before, and I think that is the end. Yeah, that's the end of the presentation. Perfect, 5 minutes over, not too bad.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.